All right. There we are, finally. Slight delay, but we made it. A bit of a different starting setup as usual. Hopefully, Dominique is going to be joining us a bit later. Anyhow, welcome back to another freshly squeezed episode of PAoA on Air. Today, as I said, not joined by Dominique. She has some weird Wi-Fi connection issues. I think that happens from time to time with home office and all of these things. But I, as announced and promised, brought a very good friend, well-respected colleague over from the UK, Mr. James Brockbank. James.
Hi, how are we doing? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time.
Nice.
Very excited to have you and to chat a bit about content campaigns, search in general. I think there was a bit of interesting discussion that led nicely into this show for today.
Absolutely.
So that was well done. But before we get going and before I go to the housekeeping, give us a very quick intro of who are you, what are you doing, etc., etc. So the usual. What do we need to know about you?
Absolutely, yes. I'm James Brockbank. I'm Managing Director, founder of an agency called Digital Loft. We're primarily a digital PR and content marketing agency based in the UK. And we're working with clients to create great standout content that drives search success. Whether that's rankings, whether that's links, whether that's engagement, some interesting topics we can come on to in that. But essentially, we create and promote great content.
Nice. I mean, this is also like a topic that we at kind of PAoA do quite a lot. However, I always find it super exciting to look into the UK, as with some other stuff. I mean, it feels like that the market sometimes is just a bit more advanced, and also like the clientele oftentimes is a bit more known to those things, right? So I think when we started out doing kind of content campaigns and digital PR in like with a more European focus or German European focus, that was already something that you guys have been doing for 1.5, 2 years longer, which is kind of the same now with like selling digital analytics. So I find it super exciting actually to kind of get your view, your thoughts on some of the things that are currently happening. So again.
Absolutely. No, of course. I mean, I think that's a really interesting point you make. I mean, if I look at sort of how I found myself in digital PR as we call it today. I mean, I started working in SEO 2009, 2010. And back then we were, the agency I was working at, we were buying links, we were building private blog networks, as pretty much everybody was back then. Penguin hit, and quite frankly, it was terrifying. I mean, I'll never forget, I was actually on holiday over in Florida at the time, and I received a message to say, almost every single client has dropped rankings. What the hell is going on? And at the time, we'd seen a couple of manual penalties, but I think, for anyone working in, I mean, I was probably 2-3 years in SEO then, and it was scary. The reality was none of us knew what was going on, especially those of us sort of at, junior level at the time. And I think, if I look a few years on from there, the industry turned to guest posting. And it never felt right to me, Well, when I say guest posting, I'm talking, you probably remember my blog guest platforms like that, where it was, it wasn't any different to what anybody was doing before. There was money changing hands. There was, content being produced on any topic with a link in the byline. It's, opinions aside on this, it should have never worked. And I think, if we look then, it did for a time. And then certainly I sort of got this thing, okay, let's start to look at how we can create proper content, content marketing, and drive great engaging content that earns links, and back in so I founded Digital Loft in 2014. And sort of by 2015, we were going, right, okay, let's start to think about this properly. How do we do it? I mean, my background's in SEO, and so I said, okay, what do we do? So we hired an ex-journalist. We said, okay, let's work with an ex-journalist who knows, the other side of it. They've been on the other side. They've received pitches. They know what makes a great story. And that's how we built, and that's how we grew. Now, going back sort of 2015, 2016, yes, we were creating and promoting infographics, but so was everybody at the time.
I was going to say, that was the same, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, one of the interesting things I've seen in the past maybe 12 months from COVID is that it almost feels like we're back where we were in 2016. What were we doing? The content on those infographics in many cases was great. It was strong. But we were going, we were producing top tips, we were producing insights, stats, trends. And then sort of maybe 2017, we certainly started doing very data heavy content, very, very data driven campaigns, interactive assets. And for a few years, that was really, really successful. It worked really well. COVID hit, and all of a sudden, our clients were saying, okay, what can we do to minimize risk? Now, a good few clients that we work with, we took the decision with many of our clients, even in sectors that closed down, to carry on. To, how do we pivot our strategies rather than, closing shop completely? Yeah. And it was a strong decision, but the reality is the media landscape changed overnight. Now, what that meant is that campaigns that had been a safe bet that we knew would work 3 months previously, we suddenly didn't have that same confidence. And it wasn't because of our ideas. It was because we were on this sort of point where if news broke on COVID, then more and more journalists were being pulled onto that. We were finding it was being pulled into the business press, into, of course, travel, in pretty much any sector for a couple. Actually, it was probably only two or 3 weeks we saw it heavily. After that, once everyone knew what COVID was, knew the symptoms, knew how what potentially to expect, we started to see the media return to some sort of normality. But clients and even internally, we didn't have that same confidence to go and invest in, an asset that takes 8 weeks to produce, data heavy. And we weren't the only ones. The industry as a whole, I think, shifted in that.
It's a really interesting, it's a really interesting take. I mean, we saw the same, and I think I recall Dominique saying in another show that we kind of had the same situation, and it even felt like, because we do like a lot of those kind of more multilingual campaigns, that it fell in some countries. I mean, obviously, probably those that were also a bit kind of affected a bit more than others. It was very, very, very hard to get anything placed that was non-COVID, for one. And then B, of course, as you were saying, like if you would have invested, and I think this is a realistic time frame, right? A campaign runs like what, 4 months to 2 months until it's live, like production and all of that, and then at least the same time for outreach, probably even longer. So at the end of the day, you're like, I have wasted a minimum of 12 weeks of outreach, and nothing, which is a significant risk, right? So very, very true. And speaking of outreach, which is a very good cliffhanger to get her in, seems that someone apparently fixed her internet.
Yes.
Hey, how we doing?
Hey, thanks God, yeah. Or thanks God.
Sorted it out, yeah?
Sorry?
You sorted it out, or you had it.
Yes, yeah. I'm super happy that I finally made it. Sorry for being late, but
no worries. We were just chatting along, and James was saying that they kind of significantly moved formats, or kind of had to move formats, and it feels a bit like being back to some of the older times where you see a lot more infographics popping up and also working well in comparison to what we had before. And I said it was an interesting statement because kind of similarly, you said the same in another episode. So that was kind of where we just were, and then kind of talking on the risk side, really.
And I think just to carry on from that, from our side, it was the risk of investing heavily, both from our side and client side, into big assets that the reality was the success of those was out of our control. So what did we do? We started talking with the media, to understand what did they want sort of March, April last year. And actually, the trends that were coming out that, from the conversations we were having was, well, we want to help people right now. We want to support people with what's going on in their lives as the media. Now, of course, we had some strange conversations with a number of clients where they were going, should we be trying to piggyback on COVID? If the media landscape, the media agenda is COVID, should we be launching content around COVID? And our stance as an agency on that was, what authority do you have to talk about that area of COVID? Now, we as typically as an agency, we don't hook to seasonal campaigns. So we don't usually launch Christmas campaigns. We don't launch Valentine's Day campaigns. That time frame, there is no longevity in that. If for whatever reason something breaks in the news, you get no second chance. So again, from this risk perspective, we were pretty good at managing that risk anyway. But what then happened is that we got to this point where, the clients were going, should we be talking about COVID? So we were saying, well, if you don't have authority, you're not medical experts. Do not try and offer advice on, even a couple of clients in the healthcare sector, we were saying, don't get involved in these conversations. What you are trying to offer as immunity boosting products are not scientifically proven for COVID. Yeah. Let's not go down that.
Let's not go there. Yeah.
But working with clients in a sleep retailer, a sleepy, a pillow and bedding e-commerce store, one of the big topics was how to sleep better. Suddenly people were, I think they called it corona insomnia, I think they called it. And so we were offering advice, we were offering tips, offering, expert insights, as we call it. And this is something that's been, really, really effective. But when I look back, it's what we were doing in 2016. Back then we were producing infographics with this insight and this, these top tips from clients. Now it was become, very, very much, create a piece of blog content. And the reason we do that, one of the common things that we hear PR teams saying is, well, if you offer sort of the expert insights, you won't land links from it. And as an SEO, we want the links. Probably the quickest and simplest way to get around that in 90% of cases is to push that out as a blog piece. Create a blog piece with those tips, with those advice, and then seek that out rather than using a press release or just sending the tips straight out. But it's not too different to what we were doing in 2016. And I think, one of the interesting things from my side that we saw last year was that we've almost done this pivot where assets are, in many cases, we're doing simple visualizations again, as opposed to, very, very complex interactive assets. And I think, both us and our clients were thinking, what does this need? Rather than going for something that looks the nicest, we're going, from a format and a functional perspective, what does this need to be to minimize risk, for the same sort of resources that it takes to develop a very, very data heavy campaign with an interactive asset. You can pitch out 3-4 reactive pieces. And actually, in many cases, the risk is so much lower because you're able to control those conversations right now. And again, it comes back to, the basis of it all, which is understanding the media landscape, which I think it leads very, very nicely onto, talking about international content campaigns.
Yeah, very, very true. And also probably with around the kind of, and maybe you can do like a very quick recap on that, because I think it was also slightly driven from some tweets that stem from the UK, if I followed along correctly. There was a bit of a discussion. I think John Mueller got involved at some point. Talking about digital PR, and I was like, "What the hell is going on here?" So, what happened there? I mean,
it's been a strange week, put it that way. So, I think it was Saturday afternoon. John Mueller essentially endorsed digital PR as, however we want to read it. John essentially, endorsed digital PR as a link building tactic. Now, I think the context of the tweet actually was that there's some great things coming out of digital PR. It's a shame it gets bucketed in with spammy link building practices sometimes. And I think, the one that's divided the industry is that, I think John's tweet ended, in some instances, digital PR is more critical to a site's success than technical SEO. Now, of course, it's like, throwing a match into the fire there. And I think we need to try and, as an industry, we need to stop and think about what was really said. It's very easy for people to pick out what they want to read into that.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah. And, we can sit here, John has not gone and said that digital PR is more important than technical SEO. Now, I'll give you my take, and I'd be really interested to hear your take as well. My take on it is that in 2021, many businesses have figured out how to make a technically sound site. They understand the importance of strong technical foundations. And we're in this point where, technical SEO it's not an issue that the same number of businesses have on the wider scale as maybe they did 5, 6, 7 years ago, or, even 9, 10 years ago, so doing that pre-Penguin stage. So the way I see it is when you come to sort of growth driving tactics, digital PR is one of those. Now, I don't believe that John said, ignore technical SEO. Absolutely not. If your site can't be crawled, if you can't be indexed.
That doesn't really help, right?
I think the way some people have tried to read into that is that digital PR should be a priority for a business. Now, the way I see it is if your site is technically sound, if it can be crawled, can be indexed, no duplicate content, then digital PR is a great way to drive growth. And yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? You know, obviously on the as a technical SEO, what's your take on?
Yeah, I think this is it's an interesting one in the way that there were a lot of. I mean, obviously, John usually, and I think this is due to the nature of his job, and similar to Martin and also Gary and whoever you wanna name. I mean, of course, they are mainly kind of into those tech topics because a lot of questions kind of they are being asked kind of go into this area, and this is actually the area of expertise, right? I think we always we always at this kind of crossroad. I'm like, when people are asking what's more important than the other, and I think the only honest answer is that there's this, and it's quite funny. So I used this slide years and years ago, actually. It's like with those 3 kind of cornerstones of SEO, which is Dominique is going to be laughing because it's like it's actually on a slide deck that's still on a 4:3 format, really old and really ugly. But it just says, I mean, it says what it should say. It says tech as a foundation. It says that you need accessible content, and it says that you need links. And at the end of the day, that's still equally true. I mean, obviously, I guess weighting has shifted to an extent. I agree, but as you said, like you can do the nicest kind of PR activities. If the site is not crawlable, it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
The other way around, if you just sit and you're done with tech, and you just hope for the best, this is also not really what's gonna move the needle. So I think it's very much true. What I find amusing though is that similar to SEOs jumping on this bandwagon of John said XYZ. Now, like those that do digital PR kind of do the same thing because maybe first and foremost, someone now finally said in quotation mark, this is important. But still, I found it really amusing to see like those parallels, right? So that really made me laugh.
And actually. I think the interesting one from my side, running a digital PR agency, and let's for us that's sort of 70 to 80% of the work we do is digital PR.
Yeah.
So if I look at it, the comment that I latched onto was that digital PR often gets bucketed into spammy link building.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Now, I think this is what's really, really divided the digital PR space, at least, especially over here in the UK. And reading through some of the comments, there were, we've seen comments on, asking John whether relevancy matters. And there was an example sharing a campaign which was actually quite good on 100 TV episodes ranked by their final episode.
Mm-hmm.
That was for a personal loan lender over in the States. Okay. And I think this, absolutely, and I think it's, it's evolved. It's evoked some really interesting discussions over the past few days on should we be creating relevant campaigns? Should we be, has John Mueller just said that any links earned with digital PR are great links? No, I don't believe he has.
Probably not.
But when we look at it, it opens up some of the questions that many of us have been talking about for 2 or 3 years now. I mean, if I look at it as the way I've seen it, the industry has moved so fast in 2 years. Realistically, 2 years ago, I don't think anyone was calling it digital PR.
True.
I think it's still content marketing. Probably 18 months before that, it was still link building. And it's so in 2.5, 3 years, the industry has come a long way. Mm-hmm. And I think anyone who tells you, it's just like there was I saw a Twitter poll last week on asking how many people have ever bought links. Now, it comes back to this. My response to that was, well, when? What sort of timeline are we talking?
Exactly, right.
Have I bought links ever? Absolutely. You could probably say the same. You try and find an SEO who's been working in SEO for probably 5 years or more. They will have bought links. And I think there's no shame in admitting that because things were very, very different back then.
That's very true. Yeah. And then also the landscape changed, right? Like those working in the industry also changed significantly. We have a lot of like young people, and again, this is not like any pointers, but like there's a lot of people recently having joined the industry from also like totally different verticals, right? As you said, journalists kind of moving into agency side or something else. I mean, and of course they have not, so they can truthfully say, well, we haven't done that. But if you have been playing the game for like 10, 15 years, whatever, then if you have not bought links, you have missed out some really strong times back in the day.
The same conversation, the same questions can be asked now on creating digital PR and content campaigns just for the purpose of building links. Now, have I created campaigns in the past that have nothing to do with the business just to build links? Of course I have. I think most SEOs, most agencies have. But I think, again, it comes down to when. One of the responses I shared, my initial sort of reaction to this was, let's be careful. There was a few people on Twitter calling out campaigns, calling out maybe not agencies, but businesses who've been creating content that might not topically align to their brand. And my sort of reaction to that was, well, let's look at when these were launched.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I'm guilty of it 3 years ago. I think everybody was. But let's have a look at the timeline of events. This was before we saw everybody talking about EAT, before the core algorithm updates, which I strongly believe have been, relevancy of link profile has been something that's been massively rewarded in the past couple of years.
Yeah, clearly.
So, these conversations have to be in the context of what people are doing and what businesses are doing now. And I think, it's very, very easy for someone to stand there on Twitter and go, this campaign is doing it wrong. Yeah. When was that launched? Was that launched this week? Was it launched last year? A year, 12 months in digital PR right now is a long time.
It's a long time, yeah. So talking about now, which is a good tie-in. I mean, if someone would ask you, what is the stuff that you really care about now? I mean, what does a campaign need to have? Maybe next to like the change of a format that we've all kind of witnessed.
Yeah.
What are the three things that you say? Well, this somewhat. I mean, of course, there's always nuances to it. But what does a campaign need to have? What does it make success? What does it?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, a campaign has to amplify a brand. I think that's the starting point for what we talk about right now is it has to amplify a brand's message. Now, that can mean different things to different businesses, but you have to understand who your audience are. When all these conversations that we've seen over the past few years on understanding what a journalist wants, they shouldn't actually happen. It should be understand what your audience and a journalist's audience wants. A journalist is just the catalyst to get in front of an audience. You have to understand what sort of content, what sort of topics the audience wants to consume. And that's probably one of the strongest starting points once you understand the audience. And when I talk about understanding the audience, there's many ways we can do this. So from an SEO perspective, we're big fans of talking about topical authority, building topical authority through content. And it's as simple as, open discussions with clients on what do you want to be known for? So actually that looks like something different for, take 3 different industries, 3 different sectors, and that can look very, very different. And again, hooking back into the, the debate at the weekend is, there was some interesting conversations on what does relevancy look like and how far is too far away from a business's core offering. Now, a great example that, I share all the time is the fashion industry. We often see, fashion brands creating campaigns around celebrity lifestyle, celebrities. And if we look at that, to me, that doesn't feel unnatural. And I think that's, it's often a good measure is, asking yourself, if a journalist has to come back and ask why this brand created this piece of content, then you've gone too far. But, one of the things I often look at is creating branded assets. Now, and when we talk about creating content, one of the things I will often say is, would a business be proud to share this campaign asset, whether that's a simple asset, whether that's a big fancy campaign asset, would they be proud to share it and put it pride of place on their homepage? If the answer is no, then that probably means that it doesn't align with their audience.
Right.
And I think, that's probably the number one point, understand your audience, who are you creating the content for, and what do they deem as topically relevant to your brand? If you're creating content that your audience wants to consume, then I don't believe you're doing anything wrong. It's when we see personal finance companies creating content around TVs, TV shows, that you start to question what's the relevancy, because really, that's very different to, a fast fashion brand where their audience is 25-year-olds and under who are obsessed with celebrity lifestyle. That's we saw that with a great success. I mean, one of the huge brands that we worked for in the past was Sephora. I think it was also one of the campaigns that we kind of
launched quite successfully in the last years. And I mean, then you're right, then it ties in quite nicely, because that's the same audience you can reach through like TV and others. But like, so we did it with like, was it Germany's Next Top Model, right, Dominique? I think that was part of the So they were obviously kind of involved in that, and we did a lot of coverage around that, used as a part of a kind of campaign work. But you're right. Other than that, it's relatively far away, right? Even though I think on the other hand, if you have something where TV kind of picks up the message, or at least the brand, that again certainly helps your SEO in regards to brand search, right? So I think it's not a one way street, right?
No, absolutely not. No, and then
sorry, I just wanted to mention, because you were talking about like, is it important to focus on target audience or on journalists? I think when you've done your homework, right, and know exactly who your audience is, or the audience of the company or the brand, and then searching for potential target pages, I mean, they should go hand in hand, right? So whenever I create content for my target audience or the buyer's persona, and then want to think about which kind of target media could be relevant here, they should have like exactly the same target audience, right? So the readership of those media should be exactly my buyer's persona, and then it makes sense, I guess, when we talk about like the digital PR aspect and reaching out to journalists.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, when we come back to this thing of, amplifying a brand's message, amplifying a brand and placing a brand in front of their target audience, then the two go hand in hand. And I think, when we come to, looking at digital PR, is it a link building tactic? I don't believe it is. We shouldn't be calling digital PR a link building tactic. However, I'm a strong believer that digital PR can earn better links than any link building tactic. But on its own, it shouldn't be seen as a link building tactic. When we view digital PR as a link building tactic, that's when we start to say, okay, what can we create to get links, rather than how can we create something great and promote it to our audience and links as a byproduct.
It's usually a shorter thought, right? So like you kind of you only care about the link as a product and not about the kind of content quality. Yeah. So what's the usual, like, just quick excursion to a slight different topic? But I mean, what's the measuring points that you guys are usually suggesting then to clients? Is it a multitude of different things? Is it solely link kind of metrics? If so, what are your? I mean, if you can do, I mean, we all know that sometimes it's not wish you what, and sometimes it's just get metrics kind of assigned to. But like, what if you could pick? What is it? What are you guys preferring these days?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it does depend on the client, and I think an interesting topic on this is we typically find that we have two sort of types of clients, and when I say types of clients, they will approach us for one of two reasons. There are clients where we are being approached by an SEO team where they want to use digital PR and they want the end result to be links.
Yeah.
Now, I don't believe we should be shying away from that. Some of the things I've seen, shared on Twitter this week are saying, that we shouldn't be talking about links and digital PR together. Well, we should. Digital PR evolved from a need for SEOs to earn links rather than buy or build links. So, we've typically got that one side where, we're being engaged by SEO teams where the ultimate measure of success for them is links, quality links. Now, what does that then come into? One of the things that we have honest conversations with is topical relevance. And we will, we're looking for sort of wish list publications, wish list content, and whether that comes from a sort of link analysis to understand the link gap with competitors, or whether that comes from understanding the media landscape. And in most cases, that's, both sides working together. Yeah. We, even before we start ideation, we know where we, at least the sort of sites that we want to be landing link coverage from. So, I think, however we look at it on that side, links matter. Links matter in probably 60%, probably 70% of the engagements with clients. But if you're only reporting on links, you're missing out on huge opportunities to both look great as an agency or a service provider, but also to make your client look great. Now, so what does that look like? Well, we've had many campaigns that have driven hundreds of thousands of referral hits. Now, if you're driving traffic at that level, you need to be shouting about it. You need to make sure that people know that this isn't just an SEO tactic. And the reality is, if you're, with a few exceptions, if you're guest posting, if you're resource link building. I'm not saying that some of these tactics don't have the place in a wider strategy, but most of them don't have the power to send hundreds of thousands of hits in, let's face it, what can be a week. So referral traffic is very, very important to measure. But so is direct traffic, increasing direct traffic alongside the campaign launches. Because, we've seen in many instances where it triggers brand searches.
Right, so yeah.
So tracking, the brand clicks, the direct traffic, brand searches, we've got a number of campaigns that we've been able to attribute, a huge spike in brand search on Google Trends as an example. These are the sort of things that should be reported on. Even when that sort of focus is building links, because these are things that as an agency, if links are the focus of the client, we're using a tactic that does, delivers so much more than links. So we should be reporting on that, and at least making sure clients are aware on what's going on, and also social engagement. I think I can think of one campaign recently that we had shared by a serious influencer in the space. I think to 48 million followers on Instagram, the campaign was shared. The client was tagged. Nice. That is a big deal. That drives followers on Instagram. And this is in the beauty space. So it's it's something that we should be shouting about. However, that one side of the client base, their core KPI is links. It will probably always be links. It's just that, we're at a point where we're using a tactic where links are a byproduct of creating something great.
Yeah, I got it.
And then on the other side, and really sort of an area that we've seen huge growth on over the past 12 months, is almost those brands who are going, okay, we want to amplify our brand and get in front of our target audience. Links matter, but actually, on that side, there's not really the conversations around, are they followed links? Or are they brand mentions? It's more about that brand exposure and getting in front of the audience. And I think that's one area that digital PR has seen huge growth on. If you'd have said to me, 18 months ago, as an agency, do you do product PR? I would say, not at all. That's not who we are. If I look, about an hour ago, one of our clients was featured on one of the national newspapers here in the UK in their Valentine's Day gift guide as the top. Their range, their Valentine's Day range, they're in the gifting space that launched today, and it was at the top, placed at the top, the number one on a point of, I think, a list of 30 Valentine's gift ideas, on a national newspaper. On that side of it, do I care whether that link's followed? Not really. No,
not at all.
No, not at all. And this is where, I think the industry needs to grow up a little bit sometimes in terms of understand, actually, that will drive thousands of hits. That will drive probably hundreds of sales.
So there's some conversions there as well.
Yeah. Going on that side of it, if we are able to say, okay, look, this campaign or this activity, because it's not necessarily a campaign in the way we've always talked about campaigns. Really, we're doing product PR. Yeah. But we're building, we're doing product PR around category, and as an SEO, as a link builder, if I can build links to a category page from a national newspaper, and drive eyeballs on the product, eyeballs on the brand, and sales, then they're the links we should all be chasing.
Yeah, agreed. I think it doesn't get any better. Yeah, doesn't get any better than that. That's true.
2 years ago, we would have not touched product. Probably 12 months ago, we would have not touched product PR because we were an SEO agency. We were building links. And I think, if I look at where where we as an agency and many others, where the industry's evolved in the last 12 months, COVID forced us all to figure out how we can get coverage without these big assets. And the answer has been staring us all in the face for so long. It's, what is a brand already doing? What are their people? People are a great source of content. I strongly believe that many businesses, many marketers don't amplify the thoughts and the knowledge and the expertise of a business's people enough. Spend an hour on the phone with, a thought leader in a business, and you have 6 months worth of content ideas every single time. And I think, where we are now is when we look at them KPIs, them metrics to track, in many cases, depending on, the engagement, depending on exactly what we're launching, revenue should be in there. Digital PR is, I believe when used correctly, it can and does drive revenue.
Yeah, clearly.
And yeah, I think that's where we are right now. There are a multitude of metrics we should be tracking, and I think one of the questions that I've been asking is, should we be starting to see digital PR as a marketing channel in its own right? Right now, I think it sits either below SEO, it sits below traditional PR. Sometimes it sits with content, but I think we're at the point where digital PR has come of age and it can stand on its own 2 feet as its own marketing channel. And we can measure the impact, not just in links, not just in rankings, but in revenue.
Yeah, at a certain scale, that starts making a lot of sense, right? I guess, but it's super interesting because this is kind of similar to like when we talked a bit kind of before the show actually started. It's kind of the same as I was saying there. I think if you look at the German-speaking landscape, or German-ish speaking landscape, I think that's also true for a lot of other European countries. It's again that the UK is a bit further kind of down the line with that, because we only see this starting to happen more or less the last 3-4 months, really. It wasn't there like 18 months ago, so it's kind of the same gap as we have back in the day when we talk about kind of the shift from I mean, okay, Germany being a hard case in terms of paid links, but like this shift to more content-driven campaigns, no matter if you call it content marketing or anything else. It's really interesting because oftentimes we kind of we're in the good position to be able to learn from some of the English markets, and then if you're very fast in execution, that sometimes kind of brings a quite interesting advantage in the kind of the rest of the European Union, because you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, what I think can help significantly is just trying to see what's actually there. And I think this is something that when we talked about some of the shifts that we've seen during last year, during 2020, I think, Dominique, you've been saying that as well. Like formats change, but not only formats, but also just the stuff that we do for clients. I mean, the funny thing is that like when we started doing kind of this format, actually, we kind of, it came out of the need for communication. All of a sudden, fast forward 6 months, we kind of been inquired to produce exactly this, or kind of help planning and executing that, and like how do we get people to join our webinars and those kind of things. So as you said, like there's a lot of stuff that kind of has been there, but also because I guess we all somewhat were doing what we were doing, and that worked quite all right. There wasn't necessarily the need to pivot, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So
totally agree, and I'm also like always super happy to take a look over to the UK to see what's going on over there, because as you mentioned, Bastian, it's exactly what you've said. We are in Germany always like a bit behind, I would say, and also when it's about like KPIs and objectives and content marketing, it's like we are still there where it's our responsibility, let's say, to also educate our clients and partners and also journalists to talk about and educate that much, and also convince them that it makes just sense to report on more KPIs than only link building, right? Because at the end of the day, when we talk with SEO teams, when it's about content marketing or digital PR, and they are only interested in see links. When you think about the next step, what happens, and when they have like internal reportings and send like the link building report to their C-level, nobody can relate to that, right? So nobody's interested in seeing what kind of or how many links did you generate during the last month. So nobody cares, and nobody can relate. What does it mean for my brand and for my visibility and everything around that? So yeah, 100% agree on reporting everything in terms of if it's a no follow link or whatever, or also brand searches are also on our side super relevant factor here, but also like social interactions as well, of course, download, user metrics, and everything around that, of course. Also offline coverage, right? So we see that in many cases when we published any kind of studies. We have so many journalists sending us their offline magazine, like a real magazine.
It's absolutely.
The first times we were like, should we send it to the client? And then we just started and took a scan, really like a scan and send it to the client. Hey, they published an article about your brand and about the study, and they were like completely overwhelmed. Wow, that's super amazing. That's like a pretty important magazine in my industry with my niche. So also something around that.
And that was landed by the SEO team. Yeah. And I think it's probably a turning point that we saw maybe 2, maybe 3 years ago. I don't think we've seen much print press coverage. We see the odd online article going print, but 2 years ago it was very, very common. And I think when we look at it from that perspective, it's sort of a reality as to the way different markets in Europe and globally still operate in the media landscape. Now, we work with a number of clients outside of the UK as well, in the US, in various parts of Europe. Australia is a market that we do quite a bit of work in as well. And I think the interesting thing is that the media landscape in most countries is very, very different. Now, one of the things that I often say when talking to clients in these other countries is that here in the UK, journalists receive a lot of PR pitches, but a lot of those PR pitches are from digital PRs, from SEOs. They are data-driven content. Step outside of the UK, and that's not happening.
No.
So, you go, we work with a couple of clients in the Nordics, as an example. And, you pitch into Finland, you pitch into Sweden, you pitch into some of these countries, you pitch in, you can still go in with the wow factor of, and these are the considerations that go into, the format of campaigns that we use. I'll never forget, one of the probably pivotal campaigns that made me want to really, really push down on big fancy campaigns was Director's Cut by VerseSearch. So, probably the campaign that made me stand and go, okay, we're producing infographics. Look at what these guys are doing. And, that was probably the turning point for me to say, right, okay, we need to get better at creating really, really engaging content. What are we talking? Probably 2016. Yeah, probably 2016 that was. And why did some of these campaigns work so well? We probably the first interactive asset we ever launched was the campaign that we still get spoken to about all the time. Was for a fashion brand called You vs. the Kardashians. We essentially built a calculator that allowed you to compare your salary to the Kardashians. I think it landed about 1,000 pieces of coverage in 7 days. It drove almost 500,000 hits to the site, and it went global. It went viral.
Amazing.
Now, if we look at that though, that wouldn't work today. That would not work today. I can guarantee. That was one, it was at the right time, but it was at the time when journalists were still wowed by, however we look at it, it was a gimmicky campaign. It resonated perfectly with the audience. And actually the client that we produced that for came to us saying, they'd been producing style guides in-house weekly and trying to pitch them out to press. They said, why are we not landing any links and any coverage? And, we pushed back and we said, because a journalist can do that themselves. Journalists can write what's Kim Kardashian wearing? They can do that themselves. They don't need you to give that commentary. So we said, okay, let's launch this. And it performed very, very, very well. That was actually the first interactive asset we ever launched. That was almost our test bed. And I think, it was a hard lesson learned for us as an agency, because almost our first hit of interactive big fancy interactive content went viral. And actually we launched another really successful campaign for an Instagram photo printing company. I think we launched that the week later, which was, it got dubbed InstaWorth. It was pop your Instagram handle in, calculate how much you could be worth as an influencer. I think that hit 1,300 pieces of coverage the week after we'd hit that. So sort of our first 2 successes of big campaign assets as an agency went viral. So we learned some hard lessons on that, because I think we almost, we're talking early 2017 here. We learned some hard lessons, and I think we had almost that. And I think, a lot of other people were in the same mindset at the time, that you could create something cool and land a lot of coverage from it, which was the case. Yeah, it was to a certain extent. But what that, very, very quickly, this started to change as more people started to do this. And, you know, where we sort of got to over maybe the next 6 to 12 months is that journalists were starting to say, well, these assets don't impress us anymore. We're getting them every single day.
Yeah.
But coming back to where we were, you go into many countries, you know, going to the US, certain sections of the media in the US, in Australia, in the Nordics, certain parts of Europe, they're not receiving these pitches. You know, a data study, with 2,000, 3,000 data points, which isn't uncommon. Nobody else is creating these in these territories. The press aren't receiving these sort of stories, these sort of campaign pitches every day. So they go, wow, somebody's created a story backed by all this data. We could never do that. We'll cover it.
Yeah.
And I think, that's one of the things, you say that the UK is, maybe a little bit further ahead. But what that means is that those who, like yourselves, who are able to adapt and able to get on, jump on these sort of tactics that are working in other territories, then the businesses, the clients can see massive, massive wins off the back of that, because there isn't the same competition.
No, it's totally true. And I think if you execute that really well and you have the kind of, you do not make the mistakes early on that we did when we started localizing campaigns. I think this is a hard lesson that we learned back in the day, probably 5 years back by now. Like once you have that process mastered, that it's not only about language, but also about, colors and a lot of other things, then then you're right. Like, especially data pieces can be localized really, really well if they have the relevancy in the market, which is something that you can already kind of figure out early on. And for us, I mean, we have been, I think, I don't know, Dominique, what the current ratio right now is, but at least pre-COVID, I would say 80-90% of those campaigns that we've been doing in 2019 at least were solely data-driven pieces, and internationally they work extremely well. And in the grand scheme of things, if you kind of calculate what that meant in terms of investment or like ROI out of the campaign, it was insane, because they were like, wow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, this data figures, stats, it's a global language. It works very, very well. It's very easy to relate to. And I think, one of the common mistakes we see made when launching campaigns internationally is it's first sort of deciding on, figuring out why you want to launch into other territories. So let's say we're working with a business in the UK, and we, determine that there's opportunities to launch a campaign to land press in other territories. One of the first things we need to ask is, one, why do we want to do that? Now, there's some of the clients that I look through, and we know, the public might not know, but we know that they have plans within the next 6 months to launch into those territories. Yeah. So we're going, okay, let's launch a global campaign that sets them up for some domain strength, some relevant links from those territories. I think the other side of it is that, there are global brands, there are global businesses, but I think when we sort of pull that back to content campaigns, some of the things that we have to realize is that there are campaigns that, when we talk about international campaigns, there are campaigns that we launch, or that businesses can launch, that target one other country. So as a UK agency or a UK business, that might be a client wanting to target the US, a client wanting to target Australia. So there's campaigns that have, that local focus. Then there are campaigns that, then expand, that want a global reach and want to touch the press in multiple different countries with one campaign. And then there are global campaigns which, almost don't have that local hook, but can travel across any barrier. Yeah. And I think, when looking at launching campaigns in other territories, you've got to be really clear on what and why. When I talk about, some of these,
and where are the limits, right?
Yeah, absolutely. These global campaigns they're often pop culture, they're sports, they're these sort of things that you could grab someone in the US, in Germany, in the UK, in Spain, and they can all relate to this campaign.
Yeah. So kind of those mass competitive topics, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And some campaigns and some topics do not have borders. You can take them anywhere and there is relevant press. And then there's almost the other side, which is, taking a campaign into multiple territories where there has to be a local hook, But I think, the number one, we talk about mistakes. One of the things that we see is you have to know and have to be able to justify why the press in a certain territory or a certain country would cover this campaign. Why is it relevant to them? And I think that's probably the biggest mistake that's made. It's trying to promote a campaign into a territory where really it's got no relevance.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think also then, so that's the one thing. And even if you feel that it has relevance, then oftentimes if you actually ask people there, then it does still not have any relevancy. So that is something that we also like, when you talk about pre-outreach and or like kind of campaign idea validation, really, a lot of people make that mistake, right? They're just not, they take for granted what they know and whether as well, okay, this topic is kind of relevant in France, so it's probably also relevant in Germany, maybe a bit less or slightly different, but the reality is they didn't ask, and all of a sudden you figure out like, maybe not, right? So we've seen that a lot of times. I think another thing, I'm curious what your take is on that. Like we enjoy working, or enjoyed, still do, I guess, working also with like a lot of like those kind of client data if available, but I think we got a lot of feedback also at some point where it says, well, it's great that you have the client data, but how is that, how can we trust the data? So oftentimes there was this like, we need this backup opinion from like an external market research institute or something. So what's your take on that? It's like, do you have any preference? Do you do both, or how are you dealing with that?
We do both. I think my personal opinion is, if you can get client data, if a client has great data, it is often the source of the best stories. Now, I think again it comes back to how that as with any data, how that data is collected and what's the scale of that data. A couple of campaigns that we've done for an insurance client over here in the UK, we quite frequently use their own data, but they are one of the top three, probably probably the leading price comparison website, and they have it's tens, hundreds of thousands of rows of data. So it makes sense that they are an authority on that data. When I think where we face those questions is where it's maybe an unknown business where the data points are smaller. And one of the things that we will then do is we will say, okay, how can we use that data to, sort of put that alongside public data? How can we use their data to enhance a story and make it unique? I think one of the things that we have to remember when using client data, when using owned primary data, is that nobody else has access to that.
Because it's exclusive, right?
And and certainly here in the UK, we're in this space right now where we're seeing a lot of what I sort of call copycat content. We're seeing a lot of campaigns. Every week we can turn to Twitter and somebody launches a campaign, somebody shares coverage, and another agency, another marketer will go, we were going to launch that next week. I think one instance just before Christmas, we launched a campaign. We saw two other agencies launch exactly the same campaign at the same week.
All right. Okay.
Now that, to me, that it's everything I don't want to do as a marketer. And certainly my brief for 2021 was, we've got to stop this happening. I know why it's happening. It's because every agency out there right now is using Instagram. They're using Google Trends. They're using search volume. And it comes back to the risk from COVID. They're using safe, trusted, easy to
exactly. Yeah. So we've been talking about that as well. Yeah.
When everybody's working from the same pool of data, you take a fashion brand, an automotive brand, a beauty brand, and what you start to find is that all these campaigns are the same. So when it comes on that, once you drop in client data, then you are able to almost narrate those conversations.
Yeah.
And it's one of the challenges that we often face. And one of the examples I shared with you earlier, Bastian, is the Cosmetify index. So that's
should I pick it up quickly?
Really
I think
great
it's a
campaign.
Yeah.
And there was a challenge with that campaign that relates perfectly to this. And that challenge that we had was that we were engaged by this client, which was a beauty startup. And they essentially came to us and they said, look, we want to build links, but we want to create a noise. Nobody knows who we are. So yeah, it was the Cosmetify index, the hottest beauty brands in the world.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So essentially, Cosmetify is a beauty cosmetics comparison platform.
Mm-hmm.
They essentially compare, I think, 170,000 products to help consumers find the best price on products.
Right.
So they tried a bit of PR, they'd done a few surveys, and nothing had hit the mark. We really wanted to do this sort of thought leadership piece that positioned them as a voice in the space on commanding beauty trends, essentially controlling these conversations. We had one problem. They were 3-4 months from launch, and they had absolutely no data. They were, from sort of looking at GA data, they had maybe 100 hits a day to the site. They were,
so
they were
no
really,
relevancy. Yeah.
So we knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't have the data. So we said, okay, we're not going to give in. We know what we want to show. We wanted to showcase demand, popularity, trends. So we took social data, we took search data, we took Google Trends data. We took this data, this public data that demonstrated popularity. And this campaign we now launch, we refresh this every quarter, every 3 months, we refresh this. And I think we've had, it's, I don't like to talk about link numbers because this has done so much more than link numbers, but I think it's hit 400 or just close to 500 linking root domains.
Nice.
But that's just the start. So, with this campaign, we saw, as I referenced before, we saw, if we scroll down, there is Huda Beauty comes out as the top position. So Huda Beauty, they shared it on, there we go, the top ranking. They shared this on their Instagram following to 48 million Instagram followers. So the most influential beauty brand in the world shared the campaign to 48 million followers.
Yeah, here you go.
We had Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things. You see her brand Florence by Mills is ranked number 5. She shared this campaign 2 or 3 times on her Instagram stories. The Body Shop have shared on their Facebook page in multiple territories. That's not link building. That's brand building.
Yeah, that's branding.
Really, this came from a challenge of we wanted to use the client's primary data, but the data wasn't good enough. So we turned to the next best thing, which was the public data. Now, these, this site is now on tens, hundreds of thousands of hits per month. So as we go through 2021, we will continue to refresh this every quarter.
Yeah, probably extend that, right?
We have journalists coming to us going, when's the new edition? When's the new data coming out?
But that's the best spot to be in, right? So
absolutely.
This is a great way.
We've created what we call a brand asset. And right back to where we started, that campaign is displayed above the fold on their homepage because they're proud to shout about it. And I think when it comes to data, these are the sort of things we need to be thinking. If data isn't strong enough when it's primary on data, don't use it. Look for data that can be trusted. And I think, whenever we use data in campaigns, it all comes down to trust. Can a journalist, can the public, can you, can consumers, can they trust that data and the findings from that?
Yeah, very, very true. Very true. Great example, actually. I would have asked you to kind of, because we're already close to the hour mark. It's insane how time is running. And I put you on the spot here, but I guess, we could probably continue and talk for hours. So I just, if I ask now, you can't say no. So we probably have to come back for one of the future episodes, because I think there's so much interesting stuff that we could talk about. Can easily fill another hour. So I hope that you just say yes, and then we get you back. I don't know, maybe in March. I think that would be fantastic. So that's set then. Anyhow, because I promised Heidi, who was producing the show, to not overrun, to not do more than an hour. We always try to kind of somewhat stay with that. Well, with a bit of a heavy heart, I think we need to call it a day. But James, thank you very, very much. Super exciting stuff. Much appreciated. It's also great to see that there's a lot of kind of, which I think we kind of figured out on the back of it anyways, but there's a lot of kind of commonalities on things that those agencies, Digital Loft and also kind of PKs kind of somewhat do in a similar fashion, which is also, I think, why it makes this chat so exciting. For those of you that are now watching this later, as always, we are also going to put like the show notes on the website. So pa.ig/notes is where you're going to find the video. We're going to link the stuff that we talked about. There's going to be a quick recap on some of the, I would say, highlights and key takeaways. James, where can people find you? I think Twitter usually works quite well, right?
Yeah, Twitter at Brockbank James, and find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm probably more active on LinkedIn than Twitter. Yeah,
Right.
find me on both.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much for having and taking the time. And with that, we call it a day. 59 minutes, 47 seconds. Thank you very much. We're going to be back next week, same time, for another episode of PKs on Air. Bye.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.